Your All Holiness, Your Eminences, I'm aware that you are all tired. You have listened for a long time, and I am deeply grateful with the expertise in this room, the extreme expertise on this panel. And I'm going to be brief. I want to respond partly to this topic and also to move towards 350.org as a summary of this particular panel. And I would like to start with a sense that there is some good news amidst all the sobering news, because I would suggest that global corporate capitalism is being reconstructed with the recession, among many other things, and with a deep realization that the great economy is Earth's economy, and this is primary, Earth's economy. For industrial economy is a subsystem of Earth's economy. This is a reciprocal economy that has laws and limits. Once we recognize this, we have a possibility of making it to a sustainable future, a renewable future, as Herbert said this morning. And 350.org represents this recognition of laws and limits. In a few minutes, we will see the range of these wonderful symbolic actions around the world. As Bob began our session, this return from 390 parts per million at present is what is at stake. For until 200 years ago, for all of human history, we were at 275 parts per million. Now there is a call from people and communities around the world for 350 parts per million. This is led by Bill McKibben, who would have been here with us, except that this day is the chosen day for these symbolic actions around the world. And you will begin to see them appear here. Now, 20 years ago, Bill McKibben wrote a book that transformed our thinking. It was called The End of Nature. And at that time, people had no idea about climate change. And he has been something of a Cassandra, speaking about the effect that climate change will have on people and ecosystems around the world. He's been joined by Jim Hansen, by Al Gore, by Dr. Pachauri of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, by small island nations, by the least developed countries. I suspect Patricia and her group too has joined this effort, and many of you in this room. Bill and I have tried to activate the religious communities on this issue, and we sent out a message to 10,000 people with the forum's newsletter. And what this is about is symbolic action at iconic places around the planet, from the pyramids to temples to churches to the Great Barrier Reef, and on and on and on. It's quite extraordinary. It's getting amazing media attention right in the heart of New York City, right across Europe, and on every continent around the world. Now, what I want to touch on briefly is why symbolic action is so important. It's necessary but not sufficient, of course. But symbolic action, as we were discussing the other day, has the possibility of changing the world, changing our thinking. That's the power of religions with symbols as well. Because facts may challenge us but not change us. Figures may inform us but not inspire us. Beyond numbers, charts, and graphs, the pull of the world on us is beyond numbers that quantify or even words that describe. And this is why we need symbolic action, and symbols from the great world's religions are crucial to this transformation moment. Because the pull of the world is evident in the immense loss we are experiencing, and we've seen it in every presentation, of species and biodiversity, of ecosystems and soil, of pure air and water. This loss is of such magnitude we cannot take it in fully. We are living with loss and feeling the grief. The loneliness this has created spills over into the addiction of consumerism. Both unconsciously and consciously, this sense of loss has created a perceived need for more and more things, as less and less around us is alive, vibrant, living, breathing with us. This is the greatest extinction spasm the planet has ever known, and it is human-induced. So, we seek then in the midst of presentations and talks ways forward. We are looking for paths amidst a surfeit of facts and figures. What I am calling us toward are 4 paths that open us to humility, humus, humor, and hope. 350.org is opening up these paths as well. Humility, we have all been called to this by many of the speakers, for we need to have a greater sense of the precautionary principle, what we are doing and the unintended consequences of what we are doing. 350.org represents the laws and limits of our great earth living systems. Secondly, humus. Earth as soil and as dynamic process is what is fundamentally at stake. Earth, air, fire, water are intricate and interconnected processes, and 350.org is representing that great interrelationship of all life systems. Because, as we have said over and over again, as we affect the air, we affect everything else. And the last comment of Neil on water, water, water. Thirdly, humor, celebration. The world's religions present a counterpoint to earth as commodity, to earth as community. We are participating in a giving system into which we enter with gratitude, joy, and celebration. That is what the great rituals do for us, celebrate life and the giving systems of earth, which is why Thanksgiving, Eucharist, is at the heart of so many traditions. 350.org has humor, it has celebration, it has community, vivacity. The young people are all excited by this, inspired by this, and that also matters. And finally, hope. Above all, we need to generate not just sustainable development, but sustainable life. Not just renewable physical energy, but renewable spiritual energy. And 350.org has that sense of hope and energy and possibility. For this renewable spiritual energy may be seen as the grace of the world. Thus, the pull of the world beyond sorrow, suffering, and loss suggests we also may be at a moment of grace, a great transformation. And I'd like to conclude with a magnificent poem by Wendell Berry, one of our great American poets. It's called The Peace of Wild Things. And he ends with the stillness of water, which is the great gift of these symposium over and over again, to bring us back to that stillness and beauty of water. This is Wendell Berry, The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. thank you, Your Holiness, for providing that for us as well.
Mary Evelyn, thank you very much for bringing that all together for us around this celebratory day, not only here in New Orleans, but around the world. There's now time for some questions, first to Mary Evelyn, and then we'll open the conversation about the topic as a holistic set of questions in our minds and can raise them with the panelists or make comments from the floor. So first, any comment or question to Mary Evelyn? Here we go.
Yeah, and I meant to say there's going to be passing around the room you can sign your name as a gesture of solidarity with 350.org, and especially with the next generation, because I think Sophia is going to pass that around. So we'll have solidarity with the next generation.
Good. First, here.
Okay, thank you. It's very good to see this kind of global movement, especially with young people. But what I didn't get from your presentation was what other elements are in this. I mean, are people just dressing in nice T-shirts and being colorful, or do they really understand what it is they're doing and what are the elements of the day that does it? I mean, I say this because I know that there are a number of these events that go on, and sometimes they're just vapid. But this, I hope, is not. But I didn't get from your presentation a sense of exactly what it is that they will learn as a result of taking part in this day. Thanks.
Well, my presentation was more to present an alternative way beyond facts and figures, and to suggest that there's a poetry to life, that there's a grace in the world that needs to be part of this conversation. I was also trying to say that symbols do matter. Now, clearly, this is a symbolic action, and some people can say, well, what does it amount to? What will it lead to? It was intended to precede the Copenhagen negotiations, and to say that the whole world is looking at Copenhagen, and to suggest this is not just bureaucrats in a room or even nation states, but civil society has a role here. The world's religions have a role. So it's to suggest there's a community and urgency and a possibility of transformation. That's what symbolic action does. These people are not uninformed, I can assure you, and many of them are also suffering the consequences around the world, from the Maldives to the Great Barrier Reef and so on.
I might just add, as we meet here in San Francisco, there's an organization called Businesses for Social Responsibility, and they, in fact, are celebrating this, but more importantly, these are mostly corporate leaders, several thousand, as I recall from my last meeting with them, who are actually talking about, so what? What are we going to do about it? And I understand many of the pictures we've seen were either preceded or succeeded by little workshops, opportunity to talk about, so what does this mean for me, my community, my country? So I think while they're symbolic, they are also tools by which more substantive conversations have been undertaken. Next question. Well, let's open it up to a general conversation about this character of corporate capitalism and habitability, or the future of the planet. You can use your words any way you want. And if there's a comment first or a question of any of the panelists, please come forth. Here we go.
Hello, I'm Jacques Debs. I'm a filmmaker and writer, so-called an artist. And a great musician told me artists are meant by 3P: pleasure, prestige, and profit, material and spiritual. Today we are talking about pollution, but also we are forgetting to talk also about the artistic pollution. We are all suffocating of the trash TV, trash radio, trash music, and so on. And I think since we are here talking about science, religion, and environment, our environment is also polluted by all kind of trash TV and so on. And I would like to suggest to this very distinguished assembly to think about also that, because we cannot anymore live without real art, as we cannot breathe not real air. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any comments? I guess I would say amen. We couldn't do anything but agree completely with that. I'd like to ask the panel, I'll make an observation and lead it to a question. Joe Stiglitz, in his remarks to us earlier today, talked extensively about the commons and how, the atmosphere of the commons. And yesterday, I believe it was, Minik helped us understand the 100 million year cycle of a molecule of water working its way around the planet, through its core, back in and around. If that isn't a commons, I don't know what is, even though at elements of time the water becomes a right of a locale. So it seems to me that Joe set the stage, and Minik gave us an insight that maybe our understanding of the commons is not well structured, and that the conflict that we're seeing, or at least the conflict raised by the question about corporate capitalism and habitability, is at its core a lack of understanding about the nature of the commons, that profitability has often is taken as a consequence of a narrow piece of the commons when water happens to be in our backyard, or that the oil happens to be beneath our country. And so I was wondering how you all would think about whether or not it is time to think about and redefine and to our holiness, rebalance our understanding of what the commons really is. Mary Evelyn.
It's a wonderful comment, challenge, and I think it's very much at the heart of the matter. It's why I was suggesting the great economy, which is actually Wendell Berry's term, is Earth's economy, that gives us a sense that Earth is not just commodity, but community. And as Thomas Berry would say, it's not a collection of objects to be exploited, but a communion of subjects. And that's a very, very different way of looking at it. So there's that worldview, and then the consequences for how humans act. The tradition that I've studied the most of the world's religions and lived in East Asia is Confucianism. And Confucianism, very little understood in the West, but a tradition which puts the human in a series of concentric circles of family, of society, of education, of the political order, the natural order, and the cosmos itself. And that sense of community, even the character for love is a human in relationship. The characters reveal this sense of relationality, which is hugely important in the Confucian East Asian world. I'm not necessarily suggesting what they're doing at the moment is a model, but I am saying these traditions are very different than a highly individualistic model of the modern West, which has led to an exploitation, I would say, for personal interests. So societies that have community orientation, certainly indigenous traditions do as well, need to be brought forward for a different model of what the commons is and what community really means.
Aaron?
I think a couple of things about water and the commons. First off, it's interesting that I don't know of a single country where you can actually own water. Even in this country, the bastion of capitalism, what you get to do is own the right to use it. But the state holds water in a public trust. And that's true of most countries around the world, that the country owns water. That doesn't mean we don't misuse it, but it does mean that we recognize there's something special. And the way this is debated in the global community today is the global debate about whether water is a commodity for trade or whether there's a human right to water. Again, I note that people have felt that it's different. not just in the approach to the law, but according to some reports, in the first Gulf War, we, the United States, had actually asked Turkey to put pressure downstream by closing off the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates, and they could because they had empty dams. You can't normally stop up a river. And they refused. They said, you can use our air bases, you can launch your troops from here, but we won't shut off the water. So I think there is an inherent recognition that there is something special. I do want to, just in posing your question, there was another time that we were grappling with this in my lifetime when nuclear war was on the horizon. And at the time, Alvin Weinberg, the director of Oak Ridge National Labs, who'd been involved in the arms race forever, recognized the dangers and launched a campaign to try and get the world's religions to name nuclear war as a religious taboo, to go to the world's religions, to ask them all to make it a religious precept. And I think that's really what you're asking. Can we not do the same about protecting our water and our environment?
Good.
I think when you talk about food and commons, a key certainly is what kind of rights can you have on land, and what kind of obligations come with the ownership of land. And I see many of the future conflicts and the present conflicts based on a still highly colonial, I would call it rather, but also it has feudal basis system. When you look at the feudal concept of land ownership, you will recognize that there are elements of whoever the sovereign is, the king, the duke, whoever, having an obligation in terms of holding this commons that goes far beyond what we have established so far with respect to private ownership on land. I find this an interesting concept. I find it an interesting concept also when you look at ownership of forests especially, where this tradition holds in Europe and other regions of the world holds true, while on the other side, obviously the lack of land reform, the lack of access to the basic means of production is a big issue in Africa, is a big issue in Latin America. And the second thing I would mention on the issue of food and commons is it appears to me that there are efforts to create shortages in order to create markets. Shortages of access to seeds, as Vandana had mentioned. Shortages of access to vital knowledge. And I see a big area of discussing what commons really are in the field of what can you patent and what can you not patent. What is to the lawyers and what is to the scientists and what is to the public in this case. Especially in the context of genetic engineering, you're probably aware that certain companies are now patenting large numbers of DNA under the pretext of that they were eventually climate relevant. The idea of patenting drought resistance, even though the level of understanding is well below this still, right? But preemptive patenting of DNA sequences, I think, is one of the issues that need urgently be addressed in terms of this is ours, this is something we have to share, right? Sharing food has a long and beneficial tradition. I'm I think those who believe that food should not be part of the global, the World Trade Organization and should be exempted from those rules have some pretty good arguments.